My God, it's full of stars.
No one